back to day two of our Compassionate Communication Challenge. For those of you that were joining me through my Facebook group, for some reason yesterday, Facebook decided that our content was spam. So it deleted our replay and all of our content prompts. So today I'm figuring out how to work around that, and our discussion prompts and the replay will be reposted inside the group if you missed the live stream. So today we are coming back to talk a little bit more about this topic of compassionate communication and how we can show up more compassionately specifically to our Facebook group, which is the framework and the impetus for me creating this challenge. But also I decided to stream it through multiple platforms because I think this information could be useful to everyone. So yesterday we talked about defining conscious exchange. And in essence, we deduced that conscious exchange has to do with showing up to every communication with a sense of intention, with a sense of receptivity to what the other person has to say and their realities, being able to discern between an observation and an evaluation, and being able to discern between a moral judgment and a value judgment. Okay, so if you're interested in learning more about that, I invite you to check out the replay from yesterday's presentation. Today, we're going to be diving into how to receive with empathy. And one of the goals for this training is to create a way for you to really get more of what you really want, and to do it with grace and ease and to the benefit of everybody involved. And so I would say that it's actually an over-identification with critical evaluation or moralistic judgments that can prevent us from experiencing empathy and compassion. And so therefore it prevents you from receiving and feeling the love that you really want, right? So for today, we're going to talk about how to identify and express feelings with more of a robust vocabulary. And we're going to get to the root of your feelings and how to articulate them using an arts-based experiential activity. And so for those of you that are just joining me for the first time or you don't know who I am, my name is Brianna McWilliam, and I'm a licensed and board-certified creative arts therapist. I've got 15 years in the field working with adults struggling with insecure attachment, and my goal is to help them go from self-doubting to self-sovereign so they can call in those soul-shaking, passionate partnerships that they want. And this training here was inspired by some of the dialogue going on inside my private Facebook group. If you want to join us in that group to participate in the follow-up discussion to these trainings, there will be a link to that somewhere in and around wherever this video is posted. So one of the things I also just want to remind any of you that are joining me here for the first time is that a lot of what we're going to be talking about here today is inspired by Marshall Rosenberg's book called Nonviolent Communication: A Language for Life. And the goal here is to help individuals become increasingly aware and conscious of how they are expressing themselves in their relationships, but also on the whole. So one of Rosenberg's, I would say, most notable contributions to nonviolent communication and its practice is identifying this habit that we have of mistaking our thoughts for feelings. So for example, in the sentence, "I feel I didn't get a fair deal," the words "I feel" could be replaced with "I think," and actually it would be a more accurate statement. Now, we might use evaluating words as feeling words, but they're really more about assessment. So for example, a description of what we think might be, "I feel inadequate as a guitar player," right? So in this statement, it's not a feeling. It's actually an assessment of my ability to play guitar rather than clearly expressing my feelings about it. So inadequacy is actually not a great feeling word. It's really more of an assessment word. So an expression of the feeling you might be having if you are assigning the word inadequate to it might be, "I feel disappointed in myself as a guitar player. I feel impatient with myself as a guitar player. I feel frustrated with myself as a guitar player." So the actual feeling behind the assessment of myself as inadequate is disappointment, impatience, frustration, or some other emotion. And it's also helpful to differentiate between words that describe what we think others are doing around us and or to us, as opposed to words that actually describe feelings. So I'm going to share a few statements with you from Rosenberg's book that he offered as examples of common expressions we use that demonstrate this confusion. So for example, I feel unimportant to my partner. Well, in this case, the word unimportant describes how I think my partner is evaluating me rather than an actual feeling, right? Which in this situation might be, I feel sad or I feel discouraged, something like that. Another example is, I feel misunderstood. So here the word misunderstood indicates my assessment of another person's level of understanding rather than a feeling that I am actually having. So in this situation, I might feel anxious or annoyed, for example. And here's another one. I feel ignored. Now again, this is more of an interpretation of the actions of others than a clear statement of feeling or emotion. So there might have been times when we thought we were being ignored and maybe we felt relief because we wanted to kind of be left to ourselves or to our own devices. And there might be other times when we felt hurt when we thought we were being ignored because we wanted to be more involved, right? So I want to offer, Rosenberg offers these in this book, and I think it's worthwhile mentioning that there are some commonly used words or words that we commonly use to describe feelings, but they're not actual feeling words. They're actually descriptions of other people's behavior in relationship to us. So words like abandoned, abused, attacked, betrayed, boxed in, bullied, cheated, coerced, diminished, distrusted, intimidated, manipulated, misunderstood, neglected, patronized, pressured, provoked, rejected, taken for granted, threatened, unappreciated, unseen, unsupported, unwanted. So all of these are words that we might typically use to describe our feeling states, but they're actually an assessment of someone else's behavior and our relationship to that behavior. So in contrast, here are some genuine feeling words that may actually reflect that there is a need that's not being met. So words like afraid, aggravated, agitated, alarmed, aloof, angry, annoyed, anxious, apathetic, disappointed, discouraged, disenchanted, fidgety, frightened, frustrated, guilty, helpless, hesitant, hurt, impatient, mad, miserable, reluctant, rancorous, it's one of my favorite words, shaky, sensitive, sorrowful, surprised, troubled, terrific, that's not really a feeling word, terrified, uncomfortable, uneasy, unhappy, unnerved, upset, uptight, vexed, weary, withdrawn, woeful, worried, words like that. And we also have a tendency to use broad and vague words to describe feeling states which are actually very multi-layered and subtle. Okay, so words like good and bad are kind of like an umbrella statement that blanket over a vast number of subtle layers of emotion that may be occurring underneath. So and when we use these vague words, it actually prevents a listener from being able to connect with us, because these vague words, or words that are actually assessments as opposed to real felt experiences, create increasing distance or disconnect in the communication. Okay, so if you can develop a more robust vocabulary, which is the goal for today's exercise, basically. If you can develop a more robust vocabulary for the words that you are using to describe your feeling states, then it can be easier to connect with a partner, and it's easier for them to connect with you. And what's the benefit of that? Well, now you get to receive. And because you are accurately identifying your energetic or affective feeling states, now you are going to be able to connect on a level that, number one, you feel empathy, because once you are better in touch with your own emotions, you're much more adept at identifying accurate emotions in someone else. So you're able to cultivate that experience of empathy, and now you're better able to receive. Right. So I want to do a little activity challenge here today and make this a little bit more engaging. If you have some drawing and or writing utensils, I would have you pull those out now. And I can also just take a pause here. And if you're joining me on the live stream, I would love to just type your name and where you're coming from in the chat box there. I can give you a little shout out here on the call while you gather your supplies. I have my page behind me. You can do any kind of materials or paper that you want to use. I'm just going to use markers, and sometimes I use oil pastels, but I'm just going to use markers because they are they're very intense in color. They're going to show up well on a demo like this, but also because I like the boldness of the line, and it's going to help me distinguish what I want you to do here. We have Tiffany from Baltimore. Welcome. Nice to have you here. I see a few other people. We have Michaela from Iowa, watching from Washington, Ray from Chicago. Welcome. We have Bill from Honolulu. Hi. We have Melissa from California. Very good. So we have people joining us from Cyprus, originally from Norway. Very cool. Happy to have you here. Okay. So before we can form words, right? Before we can form words to articulate our feeling states, if we have attachment wounding, it's likely that we were not afforded, let's say, an optimal environment that would help us to recognize and organize our feeling states on the internal level, because usually there's a lot of emphasis on what's going on around us, right? We have to attend to what's going on around us so that we can position ourselves in such a way that our needs are met. And it's usually that we are in an environment in which it may be difficult to get our needs met. So there's a lot of attending to what's going on outside of us and not a lot of attending to what's going on inside of us. And yet the body is actually the primary organizer of experience. And the way that it organizes those experiences, a la Piaget, if you want to know about cognitive development theory, is symbols. So your body starts to organize information on the psychic level through symbolic organization. Okay. So like, for example, if you have some attachment wounding and you go into a therapy session and a counselor or a therapist says, well, tell me, how does that make you feel? For someone who hasn't had adequate early attachment experiences of attunement and co-regulation, they haven't had an opportunity or been able to play and explore things in an abstract and imaginative level, then they haven't quite formed yet an adequate vocabulary on a symbolic level. And when that is the case, it's a lot harder to formulate a more robust vocabulary on an emotional level, because the words are built upon this symbolic foundation. And this is not to say that your ability to utilize symbols as a way to organize your psychic and emotional content stops once you learn words. But sometimes if we persist in an external orientation, it can. But they can both start to weave together so that your expression of self, whether it's words or nonverbal communication, become a very beautiful and intricate tapestry of and dynamic expression of self, right? Of who you are. So today, for this activity, I want us to play with this a little bit. So if you are someone who feels like there's one word for how you're feeling today, we're gonna use the body, and we're gonna use symbolism, and we're gonna use nonverbal exercise, creative exercise to tease this out. I'm just gonna grab a handful of markers here. Okay. So there's 6 steps to this, and we can do it together. If you're not able to do it right now, you can come back and watch this on a replay. So the first thing I would like you to do is to just kind of take a deep breath. Just center into your body. Just noticing that with every breath that your lungs and your ribs and your chest expands. On the next breath, you might breathe it all the way down into your belly and into your abdomen, really opening up some spaciousness inside, just recognizing that you have an inner space. And I like to imagine that with every breath, that inner space just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And you come to recognize that your inner space is just as, if not more vast than anything you might witness with your eyes. And once you connect with that space inside, just noticing in your awareness, it might be in your body, it might be in your mind, it might be an energy floating somewhere over here, but just noticing if there is an inquiry. And when I say an inquiry, it could express itself as an anxiety. It could express itself as a stressor, or it could express itself as a curiosity, a question. Maybe there's a decision on your plate. It doesn't necessarily have to be romantically related, but that there's a quandary, there's a seed of something in your experience and in your life in this present moment that is kind of resting with you, or maybe it's restless with you. And I would have you just notice this inquiry, I'm going to call it, or this phenomenon. And I would have you imagine, you might feel it, you just drop that inquiry, that phenomenon, that question, that anxiety, that stressor, or that decision, just kind of dropping it down into your body. We're going to use the body as our map for today. And you might have an immediate reaction in your body that tells you where it lands. As if the body were a landscape and we're looking for where this thing is buried in the landscape, where would it be? If you're someone who struggles to connect with your body, that feels like you feel like you're drawing a blank or it's just static, that's okay. Actually, it's more than okay. That's really good information for you because that can point you in what direction you want to go. And probably that would be top-down processing. But for today, just imagine, just take a guess. And usually it would be the first thing that pops into your mind, right? Unfiltered, uninterpreted, just the first thing that pops into your mind. Where might that be in your body? Okay. So just notice it, and you can kind of take a breath, take a snapshot of that in your mind, of that witnessing. And we're not going to go into a deeply meditative state because we're going to be a little more active today. So you can open your eyes. And I would like you to choose from your colored utensils. You will need colored utensils for this. I would like you to pick a color that you think most closely represents that inquiry or that stressor or that decision or that anxiety. A color that stands out to you. And it may not be a thought. It might just be an impulse. You might find your hand just reaches for a color first. Notice if it feels right. If it doesn't, just put it back. See what else your hand reaches for. Or you might just know right away. You might have a conscious association with it. So I first chose brown, didn't feel right. Then I chose a darker burgundy red, didn't feel right either. Then I chose this bright orange, feels right. So now what I would have you do is I would have you just express that color on the page. And this brings me to the second step. And that is assign a shape to it. Doesn't have to be elaborate. It could be a square, a circle, a triangle. It could be a scribble. It could be any shape in the world that you want. But assign a shape to that. So I'm going to the way I like to do this is I know I want this color. And you could either decide the shape first, or you could allow the shape to emerge just as your hand is moving on the page. I'm going to let it emerge. But if you need containment, I'm pretty practiced in this, but if you need containment, I would choose the shape first and then color it in. So I'm getting some satisfaction out of just like making these quick strokes like this. It's very satisfying to my hand right now. So I'm just letting it go. And it's also like my hand is kind of telling me what this shape is going to be. So I'm going to go with it. But again, this is what I'm doing right now. This is more of a bottom-up processing because I'm accessing energy in my body and I'm letting it inform how my mind or my consciousness is going to follow along. But if you're someone who's top down and this feels a bit foreign or scary, then I would just have you, looks like I'm making a circle here. You might just draw the outline of a circle and then fill it in. And that's okay too. That might be more of a top down process. So I've got my shape is kind of a circle here. And I do feel a desire actually to go back to the burgundy and to contain it or encapsulate it or boundary it. But I don't want to go all the way. I just had a little impulse to leave an opening. So I'm going to leave it like that. And if you find yourself having impulses emerge as you go through this process, follow them. There's no right or wrong way to do this. I'm just, offering these loose guidelines so that you can start to access some of your own wisdom. So the next thing I would have you do now is consider that inquiry, that phenomenon, that question, that anxiety, wherever it lives inside of you. We've got a color, we've got a shape. What if there were a line associated with this? Just a line, any kind of line. It could be a scribble, it could be a zigzag, it could be a thick, heavy line. Is it long? Is it short? Is it jagged? Is it dashed? Is it dotted? What kind of lines would you associate with this? I want to use a dark blue. So now we're sort of layering these things on top of each other. So now you can pick different colors if you want, right? I'm going to choose a dark blue. And I feel compelled to make a dashed line, kind of spiraling out from the center. And it's kind of an accelerated line once it gets further out. Now it wants to change shape. Now it's more flowery. And I just want to keep going, so I'm going to keep going. Okay. So my line kind of evolved as I drew on the page, and maybe yours does too, and just let it be that. Now, the other thing you might notice this is more something you'd notice because at this point you may have already created an image, right? So just noticing, like, how big is it? How much of the page is it taking up, right? How much of the page is this process taking up for you? If you were to imagine, like, if I were to draw, or identifying where in the body it might be, if I were to draw a representation of my body, how big would this be in comparison to my body? So for me, I think it takes up the length of my torso. I would say it's the length of my torso. Give myself a little head. The long arms. So how big is it? How much does it encompass you, right? How big is that energy, that charge in your body, that emotional, affective experience that you're having, okay? And only two aspects of this left. If your image, if this quandary, this phenomenon, this inquiry were to make a sound, what sound would it make? Now, you can make the sound if you feel comfortable doing that in the privacy of your home or wherever you are. You might make the sound, or you could associate sounds with it. So, for example, it could be an instrument. Maybe this image makes you think of like violins, or maybe it makes you think of like hard rock, right? Maybe there's a song that pops into your head, right? Or maybe there's a way of, or if this image that you've created were to speak, what would be the quality of the voice? Would it be a booming voice? Would it be a quiet voice? Would it sound very staccato, right? Or would it be a melodious kind of rhythmic voice that comes out of this, right? So you could just write little notes next to it, just to remind yourself. You could create more lines to represent the quality of sound. For mine, it feels very bubbly. And there's two songs that come to mind. The first is Blinding Lights by The Weeknd. And the second is Señorita by Shawn Mendes. So what are the sounds? What are the sounds that you would associate? And you might even make those sounds. Like after I do this, I might go listen to these songs, right? And lastly, I would have you consider movement. If you were to, wherever you identified it in your body, if you were to place a hand there and you were to allow the movement in your body to stem from that place, what would it look like? this is kind of a play on authentic movement. So for example, mine's like my whole torso. So if I were to make contact with my torso, I've just got my hands on my torso, right? And I'm making connection with this phenomenon, right? We're adding color, we're adding line, we're adding shape, we're adding dimension and composition, we're adding sound, and now we're adding movement. It makes me like, I find myself kind of wiggling a little bit like a snake. And then I want to make these like circles. And then I kind of want to do this like, almost like a breath of fire thing a little bit. I kind of want to do this. And then I want to do like heart melting kind of movement, right? And just noticing like, how does it make you want to move? And then think about, what is that movement like? Is the movement constrained? Is it more of a rigid, jerky movement? Is it a fluid movement? Is it a movement that is very rhythmic? Is it a movement where you can't find the rhythm? You could also imagine, if you're not comfortable accessing your body in that way, you could imagine if this phenomenon were to be a real figure, how would it walk? How would it dance? How would it hold its body posture? Would it be concave? Would it kind of hold itself in? Would it be wide open? If it were to enter a room and sit down on the couch, would it spread it everywhere? Or would they fold their legs and kind of jig their foot, right? So starting to bring this into the realms of movement. Now, all these images and things that I'm conjuring, this is just one feeling, sensation in your body, inquiry, phenomenon that we accessed in the beginning. And now there's all these different layers and dimensions to how you experience and might express that one thing, right? So what I'm trying to illustrate through a creative activity here is, when you say I'm feeling good, or you say I'm feeling bad, all of this is going on underneath that. So when we do practices like this, now we start to access some of the subtleties. And so for each of these 6 characteristics, color, shape, line, size, or I might call it composition, sound, and movement, I would have you assign a feeling word. And if it's too difficult to assign a feeling word, assign a descriptive word. So for example, my color is kind of a reddish orange. If I were to assign a feeling word, I would say excited, activated, aroused, awake, alert. Alert is probably a better feeling word than awake. Awake is a state of being. It might be, in this case, it's not anger. That's not the feeling I'm accessing. Maybe anticipation. So I'm just going to put anticipation, excitement, and joy just came to me. Just felt some little tears popping up a little bit. I feel very joyful today. Aww. And then the next thing I might look at is the shape. So I've got this circular shape. What are the words I associate with round objects or things that are circular? Well, circles help me feel contained. Circles help me feel focused. They roll, so I associate them with ease. And centering, similar to focus, but I'll just call it something else. And maybe grounded. Right. So then you might take a look at the line. So initially it started out kind of a dashed line, but it was spiraling also in a circular motion. And then it became this more bubbly, kind of flowery shape. So the line to me also feels a bit excited, maybe a little disconnected, maybe a little unfocused. So this is where we start to notice our ability to hold ambiguities, right? There's a part of me that's really focused, and there's a part of me that's maybe not so focused. So noticing that there might actually be some friction and or contrast going on within me that might be worthwhile looking at, right? What am I struggling with when it comes to focus? Yeah, we could probably leave that there. And then looking at how much of my body does it take up? Well, it's taking up like my whole torso, basically. So it's a big feeling, right? It's a big feeling. There's a lot of information there. And like, for example, if I were to, and I might actually after this, do some authentic movement to kind of work it out on a body level to just maybe move some of this energy in these directions so that I can balance my chakras a little bit more, right? And just explore what comes up for me through that. But it's a lot. It's a big feeling, so it's worthwhile looking at, right? And then taking a look at the sounds. I already mentioned there were a couple of songs that came up for me and how it would move, right? So if I were to think of these songs, those songs make me feel bubbly. They make me feel sentimental. They make me feel excited. They make me want to dance. Romantic. And romantic is really more about hopeful and dreamy. I've just started dating someone, so this is a good day. And then taking a look at movement. So my movements felt fluid. Let's put over here. My movements were fluid. Smooth, maybe. There was some rhythmic. I'm also in a short area here because I'm trying to stay on camera so that we can do this demo, but I think they would still be a little contained, even if I were standing up in a big room. I think I would still be moving very close to a center point. Like maybe I would actually be spiraling like this. I just made that connection. I would be spiraling like that around a center point, but it wouldn't be big. Like I wouldn't be hinging at the hips. It would be in the center, like in the heart space around the spine. Oh, I just got a lot of insights. Not ready to share them publicly, but that's good. So also centered. Again, grounded. Makes me think of gravity. So these are ways, the goal of this is to help you understand that there are some creative ways that we can get at what are our feeling states, the more subtle layers of our feelings, in such a way that it's creative, it's fun, it's expressive, and also it's going to cue you into some of the more subtle sensations you may be having. And when you can become aware of these things, it's going to make it a lot easier to connect with someone on a more intimate level because you are more aware of the intimate layers of you, right? And we can really only show up to a relationship as authentically as we know ourselves. You know, the degree of authenticity with which we show up is really based upon the degree to which we know ourselves. And so when we're able to accomplish things like this, then it is also helpful for us to be able to identify an unspoken need, right? At the root of a defensive response, let's say, if we're practicing, communications that are not as compassionate, right? Or defensive communications, I should say. So I believe that almost all conflict is about feeling our way through connections, is about assessing, is this connection strong? Is this connection weak? Where are we on that spectrum right now? Even if you're talking about, who forgot to buy the toothpaste, all the way over to the mysteries of the universe. All of the connections, whatever the content of the conversation is really almost secondary to whatever the primary emotional goal is beneath it. And that is typically to assess the degree of connection between you and someone else, and then to find ways to move closer or further apart. And if you look at the content of conversation, sometimes it will start to reflect that. So when we find ourselves in conflict with a partner, usually it's helpful to keep in mind that almost always we are looking for reassurances. What will reassure us differs, right? What will reassure us is informed by our values and by our worldview. So this is kind of like what we talked about yesterday, moralistic judgments versus value judgments, right? So one thing that I'd recommend in wanting to have a more deeply connected conversation with partners before you get into a conflict is just asking, like, when you are in an argument or when you're in a tough spot, what would you need to hear to feel reassured, even in the heat of the moment? What would reassure you that, yeah, we're in a fight right now, but that doesn't mean that the relationship is dissolved, right? So you want to think about, if you have a partner who asks for space, we may be someone who wants to press harder because we're looking for some reassurance when they're asking for space. So just become very articulate about, what reassurances are you looking for? What would be the specific words that you most long to hear? What would be the actions that would put you at ease and restore trust? What would allow you to rest in stillness and trust that they will come back? And if this applies to you, I would invite you, you can type it there in the chat box if you're willing. On the other hand, if you are a partner who typically asks for space and you have a partner who presses harder when you do, you might respond by retreating even further. And so in that moment, what reassurances do you need, right? What reassurances are you looking for? What would be the words that you most long to hear? What would be the actions that your partner could take that would put you at ease and restore trust for you? What would allow you to again move towards them, right? And again, if you'd be willing to plop that in the chat box, we can explore these a little bit. Okay. Taking it at your own pace, going step by step. These are great. Yeah. I also did a survey of my list. We got about 100 respondents. A lot of people, yes. Hi, Roller Girl. Yes. Hug me and listen, right? So some aspect of it's going to be okay, just pulling me in close and hugging me and letting me know. Some people responded, I'm okay with a partner taking space as long as they tell me for how long and when we will reconnect, right? And that goes back to what we were talking about before. When we use vague words or we express our needs and our desires in vague ways, it creates more anxiety because it makes it hard for us to clearly assess the connection. It makes it hard for us to clearly assess the proximity between us, right? On the other hand, take all the time you need. I'll be back. I understand that this is something that you need in order to show up, in order for you to show up in the ways that you want to, and I don't take it personally. These are some of the feedback that we got. So it's going to differ for everyone, right? I don't think we can make blanket statements about this for individuals. But it's worthwhile posing these questions to yourself and to your partner, because then you can gain some clarity and you can start using observations like we talked about yesterday instead of evaluations, right? And that's how we get more of what we really want and need, right? Okay. So I wanted to just close out with a little discussion of what Rosenberg just talks about as 4 ways that we might respond when we're struggling to get to the root of our needs. So with a practice of compassionate communication, the goal is that it increases our awareness that what others say and do is a stimulus for us. But Rosenberg indicates that this is not the cause of our feelings. It is a stimulus for our feelings, but not the cause of our feelings. And if we can reframe our feelings as the result of how we choose to receive what others are saying and doing, as well as from our own, it can help point us in the direction of what our own particular needs and expectations might be in that moment. So if someone gives us a negative message, whether it's verbal or nonverbal, he says there are 4 options for receiving it. And the first is we might blame ourselves. But when we blame ourselves, we accept someone else's judgment, their evaluation of us. And that can deteriorate our self-esteem. And it might also incline us towards feeling guilt, shame, or depression, which has its own kind of negative feedback loop and spin cycle, right? We might blame others. Secondly, we might wind up blaming others. And then when we blame others, then we're likely to feel angry or to become defensive or to assume a more victimized stance. And that leaves us subject to power plays or game playing, right? Or number 3, we can sense our own feelings and needs. So in the face of a negative message, we can also choose to shine the light of what Rosenberg says, shine the light of consciousness on our own feelings and needs. So for example, if someone accuses you of being so selfish, right? You might reply by saying, well, when you call me selfish, I feel hurt because I need some recognition of my efforts to take your wants and needs into consideration. So by focusing attention on our own feelings and needs, we become conscious that our current feeling is derived from a need for our efforts to be recognized. Okay. So when we have a defensive response or our immediate go-to is to feel angry, taking a pause and noticing what deeper feeling, what more accurate feeling, which is not an assessment of someone else, but rather your genuine, authentic emotional response to the stimulus, to the circumstance, right? What is that telling you about what you really need? And once you become aware of that, now you become aware of the expanding desire that you have, and you have more power to manifest in your physical reality that which you would have in your physical reality, because you can extract the essence of your desire from an egoic and, let's say, biological attachment to certain ideas that perhaps your attachment system is trying to convince you of, right? Like it has to be with this specific person. And lastly, number 4, you can also take these opportunities to sense what someone else's feelings and needs might be. So, for example, if someone accuses you of being selfish, you might say, are you feeling hurt because you need more consideration for your preferences? Right. So it's a little bit of building a thick skin for an immediate defensive response and trying to look past that to recognize the more vulnerable needs and desires that defensive response is obscuring because the partner is too afraid to reveal whatever that authentic feeling may be, or they haven't had this experience that we just did together. So they don't know what it is. And when you don't know what it is, it's kind of scary. Like, someone wants to ask you a direct question about what you want and need and feel, and no one ever taught you how to organize these things on an unconscious or conscious level. So that feels very threatening, having a direct and emotionally honest communication, right? And so if you're interested, I highly recommend checking out Marshall Rosenberg's book. He goes into a lot more examples like this, talking about he calls it masked emotional accountability, and then a deeper awareness of needs and emotional responsibility. So I'll give you one example, but there are many. So I invite you to check out the book if this is content that you find interesting. Again, it's Marshall Rosenberg's book, Nonviolent Communication. So one example he has here is, it really infuriates me when spelling mistakes appear in our brochures. Well, how could you express that with a deeper awareness of needs and assuming emotional responsibility? I feel really infuriated when spelling mistakes like that appear in our brochures because I want our company to project a professional image, right? So it's adding the I feel ... because ... And so it is the because that allows you to now acknowledge something on a deeper level. And once it is acknowledged and articulated, now action can be taken on it. Real action, right? Okay. Now, unfortunately, most of us have never been taught to think in terms of our needs, but rather we become accustomed to thinking about what's wrong with other people, that our needs are not being met. But if we can become increasingly skilled at identifying, naming, and claiming these emotions that we've been exploring here today, then our needs become more clear, and then we're able to express them more honestly, authentically, and with compassion. And that creates the possibility for deepening empathy and connection, right? And also there's the possibility of finding ways to meet everybody's needs. Those possibilities increase. Now, in the context of insecure romantic relationships, however, this is not a fix-all or a cure-all, because I would remind you, and this we talked a little bit about yesterday, compassionate communication only creates the possibility for deepening connection. I would argue that there's no possibility without it. But if you are able to use it, now there's the possibility. But a partner might, as I said before, reject emotional, honest, compassionate communication because deep down they're afraid of getting closer and more intimately connected to you. And so a practice of expressing your needs, maybe it was dismissed, punished, chastised, criticized, unencouraged, seen as weak or burdensome when you were younger or in a particularly difficult adult relationship. And so therefore acknowledging and expressing your needs could feel like a huge risk, or it could feel like a big threat to the attachment relationship itself. And so sometimes asking a partner to just tell you what they need is asking them to kind of unearth their most deeply buried inner demons and just trust that it's going to be okay when their whole life experience has proven to them the exact opposite right up until this point. Okay. And so at this point, it's really important for both parties to be doing their work, right? Or to be in a compassionate, I would say, dialogue within themselves individually and ideally together, so that they can discover if they truly are a compatible match, or they're just struggling with attachment insecurities and defensive communication. Okay, because if you can clean up the communication, you can determine compatibility dimensions accurately. And that means that you will get at the truth of how compatible this relationship really is. If you're not able to clean up the communication, then you'll always be kind of in this foggy place, right? And if you feel as though you've done a lot of work to clean up your communication, and still, when you try to approach your partner and you still feel like you're in this foggy place, and no matter what you do, no matter how you articulate yourself, they still always manage to find a way to keep the same level of proximity between you, there is an insecure attachment wound there, and it's a deep one, and it's likely comes from some degree of developmental or incidental trauma. And all you can do is create the possibility, a holding space, a safe space for them to move into it. You cannot force them to move into it. You cannot force them to meet you there. That's the work that they will have to do on their part. Okay. So with that, we are going to close here for today. I just want to acknowledge some of the comments that we've received. Love your insights, useful. Be interested in hearing your thoughts on mirroring and attachment style outcomes if anxious attachment style mirrored and avoidant. Yes, I actually have a video on my YouTube channel called The Anxious Avoidant Trap, a case of like sees like. And so I view avoidance and anxiety as two sides of the same coin, because they are both representative of fight or flight responses to sympathetic nervous system stimulation. So while you may habitually hang out in one coping style more than another, it's likely that you will experience, if you're anxious primarily, it's likely you will experience some avoidance. And also keep in mind, if you're always chasing down someone that you can't get, that's also keeping you safe from really being seen, right? talked a little bit about that yesterday. Equally, if you are practicing avoidant coping skills, what are you avoiding? Well, you're avoiding the feeling of anxiety. So they are both two sides of the same coin in my perspective. Well, thank you, everybody. I'm going to be back tomorrow, same time, same place, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And once again, if you'd like to join into the follow-up discussion, or you'd be willing to post maybe some of your images that you came up with on our feed inside the private Facebook group, I will include, just give me like 15, 20 minutes. I'll include a link to that group somewhere around wherever you're watching this video. And we can continue the discussion in that forum. And tomorrow, when I will be back. So thank you for joining me here today.